Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video view series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the class supplement, the Onomancer, designed by Micah Muldowney for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links if you're online shopping, supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. What is an Onomancer? Oh no, Mancer. It's a spellcaster. That's the Mancer part of it. And it is involving the true names of things. Everything, every person, place, and thing has a true name, which is kind of similar to how demons work, I think. Where once you learned this true name, whatever the special utterance that is, you then gain mastery over it. So if you have read the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss, which I think is pretty big in the D&D circle, given that the author himself has actually played D&D and Acquisition Incorporated for a number of years, although it's an unfinished series still. I think the spellcasting is similar to that, where it was all about knowing the true names of things. It's a neat idea, and it doesn't use spell slots, which automatically piques my interest because I am not a big fan of the spell slot system, even though that's so ingrained in Dungeons & Dragons at this point. It feels like you can't really change that without changing D&D, and yet, at least for me, coming from a background of more video games versus D&D, I would vastly rather prefer like a mana pool system or just cooldowns or something where I didn't have to keep up with spell slots or memorizing spells and all that crap. This doesn't use spell slots at all. It does use spell-like effects, which were given. Well, I'll go over it, but I'm trying to give my overarching thoughts at the beginning, and it's difficult because this is a 60-page class supplement. You know, it's a new class. It's got its subclasses, 60 pages long because it's got its all-new system of spells, and yet that system of spell casting, I think, is just overly complicated. There's too many systems there. And for the actual spells, it just reiterates spells that already exist. It's like if you took the invocations from warlocks, you know how the warlock invocations are like, you can cast, Bane, or you can cast Jump, or whatever. They just say the spell. In this case, it'd be like if you re-described the entire spell and never used the name of the spell. Like, you can do this, and you describe everything, and it's the jump spell, but you just don't say the jump spell. It does that for like every single thing, and that's what makes the incant list like ridiculously long. Like it's 40 pages of this supplement is just the list of spells, and that is way stupidly long, and it's too much. But we'll go over the class, and you'll see my thoughts on it. But ultimately, I've got mixed feelings about how this class operates. So the Onomancer, it's a D8 for hit die. In terms of your preferred ability score, I really can't go over that until I go over the subclasses, because you can literally use any of the 6 D&D attributes for your spellcasting ability modifier, and whichever one you use depends on which of the 6... take a screenshot. I didn't mean to do that. Which of these 6 subclasses you use, which at the beginning they sound like wizard schools, right? It's like Incant of Illusion, Incant of Transformation, Transmutation, and they're similar to how the wizard schools work in that you've got your own school of incants you can choose from, but actually it says you can choose whatever incants you want, but if you want to apply your spellcasting modifier, which depends on which incant you're choosing, then you have to use that, I'm just going to call them schools instead of incant, school list of spells, so it's another restriction. But the way the spells work is... the way you acquire the names is cool. I will say that. So it's a full level 1 through 20 class, right? You've got your proficiency bonus level ups. You've got the little chart. You get, their ASIs every 4 level. All of that fits in with 5e. That's fine. You can't even really use your class feature until 3rd level, which is a little bit eyebrow raising. Now that's kind of true of some classes. Like warlocks don't gain invocations, I think, until like 2nd level. There's a little bit of holding off, but still 3rd level before you can even use utterances, which are what the incants are called, I guess. Argots are they Argots or Argo? No, but Argot is the like cantrips basically. And once again, the cantrips are literally like you can do all of these things, and it literally just like copy and pasted all the things that prestidigitation lets you do, but it doesn't say you can just cast prestidigitation. It just says here's all the things. That's why this implement is so damn big. So you can't even really use your key features of your class until 3rd level, which is kind of crappy, but you can start learning true names right at 1st level. And this is one of the strengths of the class, and I think is a really cool idea. You know, when they did the Unearthed Arcana for Druids, they added a feature that allowed Druids to have make a skill check in order to acquire wild shapes, which I thought was really cool. I thought that was a really neat system, and I employed it for a Tomb of Annihilation campaign for our Druid player, in that you had to either make like a nature check or an animal handling check, depending on how close or far or how long you spent with the animal. And if you completed it, then you gained the wild shape. Very much like Animorphs, an old series I read back in like middle school, where the protagonists, they could transform into different animals. They had to physically touch animals in order to gain that shape. It wasn't just I automatically know how to transform into animals thing. So that was a neat little additional thing that Druids could do. And this kind of reminds me of that in a good way, where it adds another thing that the player character has to do in order to accrue and build their reservoir of power, in this case, knowing the true names of things. Now, the system is a little bit more complicated than rolling a skill check. It depends on the level of name that you're trying to get. For example, if it's a raw material or something that occurs naturally, like stone, fire, or air, then you make a skill check, you add your Onomancer level, and roll with advantage. If it's a manufactured object, like a sword or piece of clothing, then you just add your Onomancer level. And then as it goes along, there are different penalties for more difficult things like magic items, or of course specific creature true names. Then it's actually it's a contested check there. So that gets pretty interesting, and I think that's cool. It's maybe, I don't necessarily like all the individual like -2, -4 penalties, because I think that's kind of antithetical to what 5e is about, which is trying to downplay all those little additions and subtractions when it comes to skills. But I like the system of you have to learn all these true names in order to basically power a lot of your spells that you gain later. That's a neat feature. It's a lot to keep up with, that players and DMs have to keep up with learning all these true names, but that's kind of what this class is all about. You do get some other abilities along the way. And it nicely spells out the fact that yes, this is still spell casting, so all of the like dispel magics and counter spells are still appropriate. However, you're not using spell slots, and you're not using material or somatic components. You're only using verbal. So obviously the silent spell would make you not be able to cast spells. If you're targeting a creature, deafened, makes them immune, that kind of thing. So there are some rules for that. So I felt like I understood how it works. It's not confusing in that way. I think the biggest confusion is the fact that you can have all of these going at will is pretty nuts, because there are no spell slots. Remember, there's no spell slots. So you can have each utterance, which is your spells basically, has 3 different levels that you can cast them at: lesser, greater, and paramount. And as far as I'm aware, there's basically no limit to how many lesser effects you can have on. The biggest limitation here is that, similar to like, warlock spells known or something, you have very few spells that you actually... In fact, warlock, it's about limited spell slots. You still know, a decent amount of spells. You're nowhere near a wizard, obviously. But you literally only know like 2 or 3 or 4 of these utterances as you level up. In fact, by the time you reach 5th level, you only know 3 of these utterances, and there's obviously all of these included in the supplement. So you're limited by how many you know, but the ones you do know, you can just do all the time, as far as I'm aware. At least when it comes to the lesser version. And each of these utterances has those 3 levels, and they'll usually unlock different abilities. So for example, there's one that like allows you to cast... it's basically the darkness spell. A lot of these are just spells, but it just spells it out differently. So in this case, whatever is when I wrote down umbral word or something, allows you to cast the darkness spell as a sphere, but at the lesser naming level, it's like a 10-foot sphere. At the greater naming, it's a 30-foot sphere, and at paramount naming, it's an 80-foot sphere. And when you cast it, like, people without dark vision have to make a save, or they become frightened. Now, At 3rd level, you can only cast the lesser version of your few utterances you know. At 6th level, you can cast the greater versions. And then at 11th level, you can cast Paramount. So it's literally by tier, basically. Tier 2 unlocks greater, and Tier 3 unlocks Paramount. That seems hopefully balanced in terms of how you compare that to what, you know, wizards and sorcerers and other pure spellcasters can do. And there's a penalty system for if you try to cast too many greater or Paramount utterances and have them activated at one time. But this penalty system feels just too convoluted. It's not confusing, it's just too much to keep up with, because I would have preferred just a system of, hey, you can only have this many going on at a time. You know, say, okay, you can have unlimited lesser namings, and then maybe only, you know, 1 or 2 greaters and 1 Paramount, and then maybe as you level up, you can unlock additional, you know, abilities to have more going on. Instead, it basically says, you know, you've got a certain amount you can cast per long rest, per your ability modifiers and all this. And then if you want to do more, then you have to start rolling on these D8 tables and start accruing all these penalties. And these are unique penalty tables that are similar to exhaustion in that they're very debilitating. Some of them, like, you can't heal at all. Some of them are you can no longer short rest, or your speed is halved, or your straight up primary attributes are lowered. Like, they're really nasty stuff. And I don't know, I guess it gives you the option of pushing yourself further, but I would have made that just maybe a class ability that you can push yourself further at the cost of rolling on one of these tables, and just make it normally you only can do so many at one time. I think that would have at least helped the balancing somewhat. Starting at 5th level, and then at a couple more additional levels, you can also choose other abilities, which are these bullet points on the left side, of different features when you're naming. So, for example, having like advantage on you know, any kind of concentration checks, or being able to increase the range. It's very similar to the meta magics, basically. The biggest one is the inversion one, which allows you to use like the opposite effect of a lot of the utterances, and utterances include a lot of like opposites. So, for example, if you have an utterance that would heal, the inversion would let you deal, you know, damage or something. So it's pretty damn powerful. And then you've got 6 classes, but you don't get any of these utterances until 3rd level. Remember, you've only got cantrips. You're a pure spellcaster with a D8 hit die. And you only have cantrips until 3rd level, which kind of sucks. But then at 3rd level, you choose one of these 6 incants, and then these incants are your schools that then they give you, you know, abilities as you level up, but they also give you, they determine what your spellcasting ability modifier is. So illusion is charisma, transformation is constitution, etc. You could literally be like a dexterity-based spellcaster if you pick, which one is dex? Let's see. That one's intelligence, summoning, dexterity is gist. The incant of gist, which is weirdly sounds like transformation. It's the word steel hardens, glass melts, wood sinks, and objects move of their own accord. Sounds like a little transformation to me. But these give you all these extra abilities. It feels a bit like a min-maxer's paradise, because a lot of these are like, hey, you can replace you know, other saves with your main ability save, or that kind of thing, where you could just dump every stat except your main stat, and suddenly, I mean, think about Constitution as your spellcaster modifier. Like, you've got a ton of hit points. You can use con for all that. You've got good concentrations, you know, saving throws. It really works out pretty damn well. However, you are tied. Well, you're not necessarily tied, but you are encouraged to only pick those specific incants, of which I believe there are 8 for each. Here they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, there's 8 for each of these. Now, again, you don't have to, but if you want to use your spellcasting ability modifier, then you have to choose between those 8. So it really, the way it balances this class is, yes, you have at-will spellcasting, which is very powerful, and these spell effects can be very powerful, but it does include some limitations in that you know very few of these utterances, and you are encouraged to pick them all from the same like incant list. So it's a really tricky thing for me to comment on the balance level, because I have no idea how that would work in practice, and it feels like it does, you know, offer some interesting limitations while still giving you essentially at-will spellcasting. But it still feels very, very powerful, because these utterances are so flexible and so powerful with everything they can do. Just for an example, which, by the way, I'm going to go through this real quick. So before, you saw, okay, look, there's artwork. It looks very nice. Maybe I'm not a big fan of the actual font, but it's not that big of a deal. It's got the nice, parchment paper background. We've got some kind of interesting, kind of almost classic medieval artwork going on through here. The layout is fine. It looks lovely. And then we get to the incants, and look what happens. There's no art whatsoever. There's no breakup at all. It's just paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of information. And much of this information is just describing spells that it could have just said, you can cast the Bless spell, but with this change. Or you can cast, Fireball with this change, or something, or Heat Metal. Instead, it just painstakingly re-describes, most of these are spells that already exist between all the different spell official handbooks we've got now. It's just overly cumbersome, and it doesn't look good because there's no art whatsoever, and it's just listings of all of these spells. So it just makes my eyes roll over to have to go through all this. The Word of Intensity is a cool idea in that you can enchant an object, which kind of steps on the Artificer's toes a little bit. But look at all the different options. You have over 20 different options that you can enchant with objects. Objects weigh half as much. You can give it poison damage. You can have yourself regenerate hit points. Change it to some other object. Give you the lucky trait. Give it a +1 to attack rolls, or give it a +5 to AC. Give it more damage on a critical hit, like let it glow. Just absolutely incredible effects to give to any item. Or if you even have the inversion ability, which again, you get those every couple levels, then you get all these other ones that work in the opposite, like another 20 of them, basically. That's one incantation. And the difference between the lesser, the greater, and the paramount is just how many of these traits and how long it lasts. So for a lesser, it's just until the end of the next turn, so it's just a very temporary thing. Whereas the best ones, you can pick up to multiple traits, and then it lasts for like an hour or something. It does require concentration. A lot of these do require concentration. But still, that's one utterance. So you can see how the limitation, initially I was on board with the balance level of giving you all this power, but limiting you to a very specific power set, which kind of reminds me of how the Sorcerer used to play when they first released the Sorcerer, which might have been earlier than 3rd edition, but I remember it from 3rd edition. And the Sorcerer was a version of a wizard, but instead of having a bunch of different spells that you could cast this many times, you could only cast very few spells, but you could cast it a bunch of times, But you technically still had spell slots, you just had a ton of spell slots. This one even goes more in that direction. You have no spell slots whatsoever. You can cast your spells technically an unlimited amount of times, but you have even fewer spells that so you're extremely specialized, which is not a bad idea. But then when you turn around and say, okay, but this one utterance lets me do like a million different things, then are you really limiting me that much? For another example, let's look at Elemental Word Earth. This is one that I actually wrote down. So for Elemental Word Earth, again, this is one that takes up, this entire one right here is over a page long to describe what this one utterance is. First of all, while concentrating, you have advantage on stealth checks and all abilities or saving throws to resist effects that would force you to move. It is concentration. But then as a lesser effect, which means completely at will, no penalties whatsoever, you can essentially cast Earth Tremor, Erupting Earth, or Meld with Stone. That's what each of these bullet points basically is. Like, as I started reading these effects, I was like, oh, that's that spell. And I looked it up, and I was like, yep, that's that spell, with maybe a little bit of a change, like 2d6 instead of 1d6 damage or something. Like, there might be a few changes here and there, like the radius is different. But it's basically that spell. It is that effect. It gives you 3 different spells you can cast as a lesser at-will thing for this one utterance. And then, once you reach 6th level and you unlock Greater Naming, it gives you another 4 options you can cast, which include, and I wrote this down, Wall of Stone, Stone Shape, Move Earth, and Pass Wall. So for one utterance, once you reach 6th level, you've got access to 7 spells you can cast at will. Now, granted, you can't cast them all simultaneously. As far as I'm aware, you can still only have that one utterance and then select that one ability from it. But still, how much of a limitation is this really? This isn't like you can cast, you're limited to these 2 spells. You can cast them at will, but you can only cast 2 spells. Like, actually, even with one utterance, you're giving me 7 spells I can cast at will. Like, that's a lot of power. So, I don't know what the balance level here is. I like the idea. I really like the idea of a spellcasting class that doesn't use spell slots. It's crazy. But it's intriguing, And I am personally never been a fan of spell slots, so if you can come up with a system that doesn't use them, and yes, maybe something like 4th edition where it's per encounter or per rest or something is the answer, I don't know. But I am intrigued and I'm listening and I'm open to that conversation and I want to see those classes. And I'm interested, there's a lot good going on here that I think is very interesting, including how you gain the true words and things. But I feel like this overcorrects too much in terms of, okay, we're going to limit you to only having a few spells, but then when you actually list the spells, they're crazy powerful and super flexible and give you all kinds of abilities and things you can do. And it's just way too much. Like, if you're a class supplement, like, yes, a class is going to have a lot of information on there, especially if you give them, like, you know, invocation style things where it's like you've got things you can pick and choose, and you've got multiple subclasses in here. But 60 pages for a single character class is a red flag. Like, you've got too much going on here. And the problem is the utterances. It is 40 pages of these utterances of these spells. And it's poorly organized because most of them you could just say you can cast the Pass Wall spell, you can cast Move Earth or whatever. And I think it's just way too much for each one of these utterances. That's just, you're giving me too much flexibility and power with just a few of these, to where I think it almost cancels out the fact that I'm only getting 2, 3, or 4 of them as I level up. And remember, this is basically at-will spell casting. There's really there's no spell slots. As long as I can speak, I can basically make this shit happen. So the power level just seems kind of off the charts and kind of crazy. So initially, then that's why I've kind of gone back and forth. Like, I like a lot of what's going on here. The fact that you can choose your own spellcasting ability modifier, depending on what subclass you're choosing, is interesting. And the fact that it has some limitations built in. But I think it all comes crashing down once you get to the actual utterances and realize that they are just batshit crazy powerful and flexible. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Onomancer. Pro, discovering true names is an interesting and rewarding system. The Delve True being that at first level is fun and cool. I liken that to how the Druid in the Unearthed Arcana gains wild shapes. It's neat. It's a neat feature. It's probably a little too fiddly as written. I would probably modify it a little bit, but I like the idea where you do have to learn all these true names before you can use most of these utterances and how they operate. That's a cool idea. Pro, 6 subclasses based on the D&D ability scores, which determine your spellcasting ability modifier. That's a neat concept I haven't seen before, which is not only is your subclass choice thematically tied to which kind of spells you want to use, but it also determines what your primary spellcasting ability modifier is going to be for the rest of your career. And not, it doesn't say you can only pick these, but it kind of soft locks you into picking those certain ones in order to get the most out of, being able to use your ability modifier for all of them. Cons, there's over 40 pages with no artwork. That's me basically complaining the fact that 2/3 of this supplement is just too goddamn long of the utterances, and it just feels like the designer just kind of stopped caring about the layout at that point and just listed them, which would have been fine if this was 10 or 15 pages, but this is 2/3 of your supplement is just walls and walls and walls of text, and it's just a slog to try to read through. And of course, the other con, also with utterances, is that they are way too powerful, flexible, and cumbersome. Even though you're giving the Onomancer some restrictions and limitations that are built in, they just feel like they are way too much for what, even for what they give you is just incredible power for at-will spellcasting. I don't know. Final verdict, knowing and using true names to cast spells sans spell slots is a worthy cause for a new character class, but the incant system and utterances are far too powerful and unwieldy compared to other classes. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Star Loverly, Thomas, Ian, Captain Mike, Adam, Goblin Works, Aiden, Instant Lose. And gold patrons: RPG, Papercraft, Stormy Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos, Dade, Vicente, Gilberto, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy 619, Sklenia, Farty McButterpants, Blood Angel, Veronis, The Fireworks Factory, Baboon, Sean, AK, Cert to be Nathan, and Fast Like a Tortoise. Thank you all very much for your support.